it was a day, it started like any other. I was in the shower, found a lump, went on to receive a diagnosis that completely changed everything. Finding out that I had cancer felt metaphorically like someone had taken a stick, put it through the front wheel of my road bike, and I found myself catapulted into the air. I had to reflect, and my reflection was that effort plus optimization algorithm, as attractive as it sounds, wasn't sustainable. They weren't necessarily biasing towards effort plus optimization. They were connecting effort with recovery.
Well, the top of the morning to you, and welcome to It's a Good Life. I'm your host, Brian Buffini. And today we have a doctor in the house. And this doctor is going to help us change the way we think about performance and resilience. And very, very excited, Dr. James Hewitt. And just to show how much love there is in the world these days, an Irishman is going to interview an Englishman. I mean, we are breaking ground here today. James is a human performance scientist, a former elite cyclist, cancer survivor, God bless him, an advisor to Fortune 500, and what really excites me is the Formula One teams he's helped. He has a brand new book that just came out called Regenerative Performance. And as someone who's in the coaching business, we are very, very excited about this content. It shows us how to thrive without burning out, with our natural rhythms and building real recovery into our lives. So we're very, very excited about this content. James, welcome to the show. You're in Sweden joining me today, traveling all over the world. Thanks for taking the time for us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks so much for inviting me.
So before we dive in, you have a fascinating story. Now, it's interesting. I'm going to ask you to kind of Americanize yourself here for a second, because the English are not great at telling their stories. I got to tell you, they're great at telling other people's stories, right? You guys are just get on with it. It's an admirable quality, but I just think you have a fantastic story that makes you eminently relatable. You know, you were an elite cyclist, hanging with the high performance. You had your own health battles. I'd love you to kind of walk us through the story of where you started from and how you ended up in the regenerative performance business.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. So for as long as I can remember, I've always been fascinated with anything that goes fast. So space rockets, racing cars, anything with wheels. And in my teens, I discovered the sport of road cycling. So that's road racing, think Tour de France. And I was enamored by this idea that you could hit speeds of 100 kilometers an hour on tires a few centimeters thick. It's less than an inch for our imperial friends. Right. And it's amazing, isn't it, what you can convince yourself to do when, you know, the prefrontal cortex in your brain hasn't fully developed. So I was enamored by that sport. I loved that sport, and that passion led me to move to the south of France in the early 2000s to pursue
Who was your role model cyclist?
Well, this was in the days where Lance Armstrong was the man.
Yeah, for sure. I've met him. I've interviewed him. I understand. He was 7 times Tour de France winner. It's hard not to be inspired by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I, in the early 2000s, in his heyday, moved to the south of France and to pursue this dream. And so I had the opportunity to race full time for several years. I moved through the categories. I even won a few races. But the writing was on the wall. I wasn't going to be a top pro cyclist. It was clear. And so I decided to cut my losses and return to the UK. But the time was really influential because it embedded what I now describe as an algorithm in my mind. And this algorithm, you could summarize it as effort plus optimization equals peak performance.
You have to give us that again. That was really good.
Yeah, effort plus optimization equals peak performance.
Nice.
And so I returned to the UK, went back to university, eventually set up my own coaching business. And the coaching business was interesting because I was working with primarily amateur cyclists. I had this idea that I was going to go and be the coach to the pros, but the people who paid the bills were these super enthusiastic amateurs.
Just so you know, that's the same in every sport. You know, when they give the NFL guys the training for free, but they make the money on the high school kids, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting, and that's exactly how it worked in road cycling. And so I was working with these guys, who were mainly guys, some really talented women as well, actually, but all of them were knowledge workers. These were people who think for a living. So these were finance professionals. They were people in real estate. They were, or in property, as we might say in the UK. They were technology workers. They were consultants. And for some reason, after working 80 hours a week, they went and raced 180 kilometers at the weekend. And I just became fascinated with the nature of knowledge work, because the challenge that I saw was that while I had all these great tools to measure physical performance, I didn't really have a way to measure cognitive performance. And so I started to develop a toolkit around that, but still based on this model of effort and optimization. And I ended up getting headhunted by a Swiss human performance company. And so moved over to Switzerland and soon found myself working with high performers in a really broad range of contexts. So I was working with Formula One drivers and teams, Fortune 500 executives, traveling the world. And to my surprise, I found that we had something in common. We were all living life at 1 million miles an hour. And I probably would have kept going like that. I was trying to optimize everything. I was trying to succeed professionally while also be a good parent to our 2 sons. I was trying to be a good partner to my wife. I was also trying to do a PhD in my spare time before I was a doctor. And on the surface, everything did look great. But the truth was, behind the scenes, I was pretty close to the limit. That effort and optimization approach was exhausting. Now, I probably would have continued, but in the end, I had an experience that deconstructed that reality that I tried to put together. And it was a day, it started like any other. I was in the shower, found a lump, went on to receive a diagnosis that completely changed everything. And, I imagine that some of your listeners probably experience this personally. If you haven't, statistically, you probably know someone who has. And for me, finding out that I had cancer felt metaphorically like someone had taken a stick, put it through the front wheel of my road bike, and I found myself catapulted into the air.
How old were you when this happened?
So I was in my 30s when this happened.
And how old were your kids?
So how old are they then? So they would have been like 7 and 10.
Woof.
So young kids, and and it was an interesting experience, because on one hand, I went from thinking I was invincible to suddenly confronting my own mortality. And I kind of landed, not on the tarmac this time, but in a chemotherapy ward. But to my embarrassment, what struck me when I found myself sitting there was that this was probably the first time that I'd properly stopped in the best part of 20 years.
Right.
Because, I'd got into this sport of road cycling as a teen and basically just hammered life ever since then. Going from one achievement to another. And I stopped and I paused and I had to reflect. And my reflection was that effort plus optimization algorithm, as attractive as it sounds, wasn't sustainable. I couldn't keep going, being always on at 1 million miles an hour. But giving up and checking out, disengaging, that was clearly not an option either. It just was never going to work for me. And I needed what I came to describe as a third way forward. Now, thankfully, thank God, I went on to make a full recovery. I got back to 100% health. But in the process of that recovery, I had more time to reflect. And I realized during that reflection time that the answer, this third way, had been staring me in the face the whole time. Because when I reflected on my time as an athlete and as a coach, and I thought about the true top performers in both sport and in business, and by top performers, I mean people who were able to sustain performance long term, they weren't necessarily biasing towards effort plus optimization. They were connecting effort with recovery. It was actually effort and recovery which was the basis for their sustained high performance. And my revelation was that I realized that we needed to approach our lives, but in particular our work, like a cognitive endurance activity, balancing this relationship between effort and recovery like elite athletes. And so that didn't mean just back off, spend all your day floating around a spa, not at all. It meant going all in sometimes. And I think I want to be clear about that, because hard work is required to achieve big results.
Right.
But you need to balance that with really effective, proactive recovery. And I went on to describe this approach as regenerative performance. And the concept of regenerative performance is that true sustained high performance doesn't emerge from this constant optimization, but rather by creating the conditions and the skills and the context where our well-being and our performance complement rather than undermine each other. Right. And so that's how I ended up getting from cyclist to scientist, because the PhD emerged along the way, My PhD was specifically in this topic of how do we sustain high performance. The irony was I didn't apply it to myself while I was studying it, which is generally what happens, I think, with speakers, authors, and communicators.
God wakes us up in different ways, and there's a different way to learn things, and experientially is the highest. I'm reminded of, we were a part of launching the book, The Powerful Engagement, many years ago with Dr. Tony Schwartz.
Great book.
And Jim Lair, and they had, worked with high-performance athletes, and the rest and recovery piece, that's what they were working with top athletes, and one of their specialties was tennis players.
Yeah.
And the differentiation they found with the top tennis players and the mid-layer tennis players is what they did to recover between games and between points, and how they could reset. Now, in reading your work, so I've been around this as a guy that leads this big coaching organization. We're trying to help people perform at the highest level, and we say work by referral, but live the good life. And we've kind of landed on kind of like it's a sprinter, right? It's not the marathon. You go hard, then you rest, recover, you go hard. But you have this concept I'd love you to talk about. It's the triangular release pattern, and it sounds awfully overwhelming. But I just think this is the fresh eyes on an old topic, and I think that's why your book and the timing of your book coming out of, I really feel like the world is just now, I feel like it in my business, in a post-COVID recovery mode. COVID from 2019 to 2024, the whole world just changed for everybody. And I look at my own business, my own industry, and it's only now that I see us like getting back to these fundamentals of business and life and so on and so forth. But I'd love you to go into this triangular release pattern, because I think there's just genius in it, and I think it is the innovation that you bring to the table that has taken this content to a whole new level.
Well, so that model, that triangular pattern, is an observation that many of us, in trying to sustain high performance, achieve peak performance, achieve great things, often fall into this trap of either burning out or checking out. Right. And I'll give you a very practical example of that. So we're flooded with information now about how we can improve our well-being and our performance, right? So if you were to follow all this advice, you'd be waking up at 4 a.m., jumping in an ice bath with a supplement shake, a sauna, and at least 30 minutes of meditation before anyone else had woken up, right? And it sounds so compelling, really compelling. And I've seen so many people, and I've done this myself, fall into the trap of seeing some new protocol or routine or supplement stack and thinking this is the solution. And it feels like it is initially. And so this is the top of the triangle, which is called initiation.
Right.
And so we get going with this huge, huge enthusiasm. Now, for a while, we can achieve the second point in the triangle, maintenance. We do keep going. But the problem is that life gets in the way. And these what I call over-optimized or hyper-optimized routines rarely survive their encounter with reality. So, you run out of the supplements, they don't turn up. Maybe you've got a family, you've got kids, or there's other caregiving commitments, and someone needs your help, and so your morning routine gets disrupted. Maybe you just get tired. Waking up at 4 a.m. isn't for you. And we can talk about chronotype and why actually this 5 a.m. club for many people doesn't work. But regardless, you encounter this resistance. And often what happens is you give up because it's just not sustainable. And you kind of go back to this, what I call this other extreme from hyper-optimization, which is sometimes described as quiet quitting or disengagement. You just kind of say, wow, it's all too much. And you keep going like that for a while until the next new bright idea comes along. And then you initiate again. And you maintain for a while, and then you encounter resistance and you give up. And so it creates this extreme oscillation between this over-optimization, which can lead to kind of burnout. You get exhausted psychologically, cognitively, emotionally, even physically. And then you kind of disengage and start to build back up a bit, but not in a particularly efficient way or effective way until the next bright idea comes along. And so the idea of regenerative performance is that we try and avoid these extremes because we see it. I mean, one of the stats that really always stands out to me is the fact that the levels of spending and investment on self-improvement, so that includes the saunas, the ice baths, the supplements, have reached all-time highs.
Yep.
Yet, levels of life satisfaction are nearing historic lows. there's something about this approach that isn't working. And often what we end up experiencing is that triangular pattern that you described, that I talked about in the book.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be that way. That is the good news.
Right. Well, let's talk us through that, because, I am one of those guys. Now, I will say I have a great morning routine I love, but I also travel. So I don't get to bring the sauna with me.
Unfortunately.
I jump in the pool in the morning right after the sauna, and I work out, I do a sauna, and I jump in the pool. And then I get on the road. And so you can't live by that. You got to have these other protocols and processes, and also mindset. And I'll throw mine in as well. But ultimately, what's your solution for this? How do you you're in Zurich yesterday, you're in Sweden today, you'll be back in Cambridge at some point in time, visit the folks down in Nottingham, and you got to do all your stuff. How do you keep it together? Like, how do you stop from, especially a guy that had the wrench in the front wheel of the bicycle? It's got to be in your mind all the time. So how do you do it now? How do you maintain this balance?
So I'd argue that we need to give up on the idea of balance, actually.
Right. Yeah, I call it balancing, right? It's an active word.
I totally agree with you, Brian. Yeah. I think that is spot on. Because the problem is I know what you mean when you say balance or balancing. Yeah. But unfortunately, sometimes we end up believing that it's possible to achieve this perfect equilibrium.
Yeah.
And actually, it's not. And we all know instinctively it's not. And the problem is it creates this kind of perfectionistic goal. And we end up beating ourselves up. And similar to that pattern that we just described, the day you can't do the workout, or you don't take the supplement, or things get disrupted, it creates stress. And actually, I see often that these protocols, these routines, end up being a source of stress rather than a source of energy and renewal.
Because I'm failing.
Exactly. So the first step, I think, is flexibility. It's having a healthy flexibility.
Good.
It's also, paradoxically, it's actually about exercising some self-compassion. Mm-hmm. Now, it's interesting because there's a tension here. There's a real challenge, I think, in this high-performance space. And I think it's most obvious in social media, actually, where people have created what I call high-performance theatre. Mm-hmm. And so they paint this picture of what high performance is about, and it is about all these elaborate protocols and routines and perfect rituals. But that is impossible. And the problem is that we try and achieve that. We feel like we can't, and we feel bad about it. We beat ourselves up. Right. We actually do need to be kinder to ourselves. And often I encourage myself to try and be the friend to ourselves that we aspire to be for others.
Right.
And so if you do have a morning routine, brilliant. But on the days that you don't hit it, you don't achieve it, don't beat yourself up. Imagine that a friend came to you and something happened in their life and they didn't manage to achieve that routine. What would you say to them? Certainly, I know I would be kinder to them than often I am to myself, I'm ashamed to say. So it's this blend of self-compassion, of flexibility over being fixed. But it's also recognizing, as I said earlier when we were speaking, that there are times to go all in.
Sure.
To go really hard. But the deeper you go, then the better your recovery has to be. And there's a notion in endurance sport and in physical training and preparation more broadly that it's not actually possible to overtrain, but you can under-recover. Mm-hmm. And because recovery acts as a forcing function, which if we get that right, we can add on the effort on top of that. And so it's really about to avoid these extremes. It's about embracing healthy flexibility. It's about clarity, knowing when to grit, but also when to quit.
Right.
And often that means being community, because we often aren't very good judges of that, I've got to say.
Right. You
need your personal board of directors who can help you to figure that out sometimes.
Right. What are some of the things you do to keep that in check? Now you're in demand. Now, I know the speaking life pretty well. Been doing it for 30 years. It's not what people think it is, right? It seems sexy. It's a lot of nights in hotel rooms.
Yeah.
A lot of room service. You go to a hotel. Does the hotel have a gym? Yes, it does. And it's a stationary bike facing a black wall, and it's So how do you maintain this for yourself now?
Well, I make sure that the pull-up bar isn't too close to the ceiling, so I don't knock myself out. That's always my favorite, when there's one of those pull-up bars like right up under the ceiling tiles. So for me, some of it is about accountability and community, and having a really close group of friends. So I don't have loads and loads of close friends. I actually don't think that's necessarily possible. It's certainly not possible for me. But there's a group of guys, there's 4 of us, and once a month, we get on a call for an hour. And we basically ask each other the tough questions of life about how we're investing our time and our energy, what we're doing. And we're kind of in similar life stages in the sense, well, some of us have got slightly older kids and some of us younger, but we're married guys, we've got kids, we can kind of relate to each other in that sense. Not to say that you can't relate to people if you haven't got kids, but it's a group that we're connected on several different levels. And for me, it's so important because I am a very driven person. There's a lot that I want to achieve. The reason I want to achieve is I want to have a positive impact on as many people as possible. I want to share what I've had the privilege to learn because I think it can help people improve their lives in many dimensions. But that strength can be overused.
Right.
And we can talk about, there's a whole framework around this notion of our greatest weaknesses are sometimes the overuse of our strengths. And this group of people will share those hard truths with me. And whether it's about perhaps saying yes too many times to things which I didn't need to say yes to. There's and putting effort in the right place. I'll give you an example of that practically. As a speaker, it's often easier to hop city direct to city rather than come home in between. Right. And there's definitely a case for that sometimes if it's going to reduce the quality of your energy with your family when you eventually get back. Right. But sometimes it's like, sometimes I'd like to have like a couple of days in a 5-star hotel, chilling out in between. Yeah. But I know that what really matters to me is getting home and spending a day quality time with my wife and my kids. And my friends will keep me accountable about that. And they'll say, so what's your schedule looking like? And I'll kind of be a bit vague about it. So couldn't you go home in between that? And I'm like, well, I could. And they say, well, you probably should, because you tell us this is really important.
Well, and here's the thing, I'm on the other side of it, right? So I was so committed to that because the speaking business is a trail of broken marriages and lives.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's been like that for decades. So I bought an airplane. So, and I did the good thing, but I'll tell you, I did it to an extent too. So I would be in Houston in the morning and I would be home and I would have dinner with the kids and coach them that night. And, and I don't regret that because, I have 6 great kids who've turned out fantastic and my bride and I have 35 years are doing great.
Wow, congratulations. That's great.
However, I will also tell you, I definitely used it. I used a virtue to burn the candle at both ends. And sometimes, I was great for the family and so on and so forth. I wasn't always great for myself. Now, what I have now is my kids are all grown. They've turned out well. Life is good. And now, I've always said I've traveled all over the world and seen nothing. It was kitchens and dumpsters. Now the seasons in life, you see the back of a convention center. And so now I'm in the season of life where I do take a day. And sometimes my bride will join me, and sometimes one of my kids who works with me comes with me. But I'll take an extra day and see something. And so I've turned it into now where, and again, the seasons of life I think are a big thing to talk about because what works when you have a 7 and 10-year-old is different when you have a 21 and a 25-year-old. Those kinds of things. Where you are financially, where you are health-wise, where you are age-wise. But I've even in that you have to have empathy for yourself, and I haven't always managed that. I've always been so driven that when I felt the burnout, it was just, that was like the price to pay. And I've had to fight through it to such a degree that, again, eventually God gets your attention. We all get the spokes, a stick in the spokes. We all get it. You can get it financially, you can get it personally. And then you come to the point, it's like, okay, well, what is the purpose of life? Like, why am I actually here? The people in Sweden are going to get a great talk tomorrow, but at the end of the day, being at home with dinner with the wife and kids, it is in the grand scheme of things, it's a higher value. It's just, and so that's why I say, the reason we talk about this dynamic of balance, the reason why that's wrong-headedness is that it's a destination thinking. Like, once I get there, I'll be. Once I get this amount of money, I'll be. Once I'll do that, I'll be. And for a guy who's had a lot of those destinations checked off the boxes, and I'm a few years down the path here, none of those destinations at the end of the day are a destination. It is a journey. It is a process. And for me, I'll just say this, where I find myself, I'm 30 years in the coaching business, and I have found myself more re-inspired and reinvigorated about it than I have been in a long time. when I got reconnected at the very grassroots of where the rubber meets the road, of people who are actually in the trenches that we're helping, of my staff that are really down in the trenches with those people, and to really, get out of this C-suite environment. I meet with all these muckety-mucks and all these, elevated people and the boards I'm on and all that stuff, which has all been desire to serve. But the real essence of it is rolling up my sleeve and getting into the nitty-gritty of the people that really count, that are, when you get a chance to serve. Our mission here is to impact and improve the lives and livelihoods of people. And it's almost like, for me, I've had to rededicate myself to that. And that has done more for me than any miracle morning. That has done more for me than any routine. That has given me an energy and a focus and a clarity. And now, so here's where I'm at in my life, and maybe you can coach me through this. I got a free coaching session out of you here, Doc, is now I'm working out and trying to do the routines because I want the capacity to serve where I find this joy. And that's kind of what's my motivation today. I don't have, I want to be this % body fat or this weight or this type of thing or whatever else. Now it's a case of, I want to be as in optimal condition as I can be, so I have the right amount of capacity for these very purpose-driven things that are filling my heart. And that's kind of where I'm at this stage of the game now. But, it's easy to say that type of stuff when you have money in the bank and things are good, but that's kind of the stage of life I'm on, And I just don't know. I mean, I don't know, looking back, what advice I would give. But if you look at somebody like myself, what advice would you have for somebody like me who's been there, done that, and is now at this next stage of the game? But I can easily burn out on the mission too. I can burn out on the purpose. So caught up with the people, I could burn myself out on that too.
Absolutely. No, you covered so much great ground there, and there's so many dimensions to what you've just shared, and I really appreciate you sharing it. I mean, just before I share some coaching thoughts, I just wanted to pick up on some concepts that you referred to there, and one in particular was this notion of the arrival fallacy,
right? Which
the false belief that when we achieve some goal, we're going to experience enduring happiness. And we all know that's not the case. And we really, in many ways, only have today. But again, there's this tension because we do also need to think about the future.
Right.
You also had this great point about this focus on the process while keeping the outcome in mind, which I really think is the counter to that arrival fallacy. The outcome is important. It's good to say, I want the plane or the financial goal. I think there can be really healthy things, but the only thing we can control is the process. And there's a really interesting study that described that in an athletic context, the efficacy, so how effective process goals are relative to outcome goals, it was remarkable. Process goals, which focus on the steps we can control, were 15 times more effective than focusing on outcome goals, which is the thing we're trying to achieve. And I think there's a generalizable truth there. There's a principle. But then you talk about how do you maintain that sense of energy and the capacity to continue to engage in that process towards that outcome that we're trying to achieve, that ongoing outcome of having that positive impact. I think one of the most important things is about continuing to make sure that we're calibrated around a deeper sense of purpose and meaning, which really came through in what you were sharing there. Because we know that we can endure a huge amount if we feel it's purposeful and meaningful.
Right.
Sometimes to a fault, but continuing to reconnect with that sense of purpose is going to be absolutely key. But the challenge is that you do need the energy, because what we often find is, I'm sure that many people have experienced this, that for me, one of the number one signs of the early signs of burnout, to be honest, in myself and others, are I stop experiencing as much joy in the things that usually bring me joy.
Yep.
And so you see this in a coaching context where usually you love speaking to people, hearing their stories, sharing thoughts with them, reflecting back what they're saying to you. And then suddenly you see that calendar meeting and you're like, I can't face it.
Right.
And that's a warning sign. So what are you doing to recharge? And it sounds like you've got some good things in place, but I would say, what things are you doing proactively to make sure that you are regenerating cognitively?
Yeah.
So you're stimulating your mind. What are you doing emotionally? And so this is about the people and the connections around you. And then also what you're doing physically. The cognitive one for me is really about committing to continuous learning. There's some really interesting data related to longevity and cognitive health that speaks to the potency of continuous learning. And so people who commit to being a learn-it-all rather than a know-it-all
right.
have better cognitive and brain health long term.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very clear. So there's a cognitive
That's
component.
good. Something I did this morning was a great example. Here, you'll get this because Nottingham is where the good doctor's from. Now, he lives in Cambridge, which is a beautiful place. I got a chance to bring my family there a few years ago. But the north of England is a different place, like. And I'm from Dublin. I'm a house painter's son. And so I had to my initials, I get to America, you left, it's not lost on me that you left Nottingham to go to the south of France. Let's just say that's not a well-worn path, okay? Let's just say most of your schoolmates didn't make that call. So you were driven, you were focused, you had to get out of your environment, and I'm sure not everybody was cheering you on the bus to do that. Like, there's a lot of, what are you doing? What are you thinking? I've lived it. And so I had to break out of that, become my own guy in America and become this kind of like a guy who became a sponge for learning, and I grew and whatever else. And now I'm comfortable, whether I've met with presidents, the movie stars, whatever. We've had them all on this show. I've had hundreds of these people at our conferences. So I've learned to be comfortable in that environment. But now where I'm at in my life today is I'm still blue-collar guy. I'm still a house painter's son. So like this morning, before our interview this morning, I went over to visit Yolanda and Yolita, the Jimenez sisters, who run our warehouse. And I went over there, and they're 4'10". You could eat your dinner off the floor. This is a big, big warehouse. We got the forklifts and everything else and all the materials, and they keep the place spotless. They have a sign. Everything goes out the door. They have a big sign that says excellence departing. One of our core values is excellence, our minimum standard. And I was just walking through, and I just paid a pop by. They were so delighted to see me. I'm just coming over, and these folks are, they serve silently behind the scenes. And so I'm just like, she's 20 years in the warehouse. And I'm like, how do you do this? She goes, well, I know, Mr. Brian, we change people's lives. And she goes, my sister and I, every time we send a pallet out, we pray over the pallet that God would use the materials to change somebody's life. Now I am like, I'm choking back the tears. I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm good for 3 months. Like I'm good for, you know what I mean? Like I'm like, bring it on. I'm 58 years of age. I've been doing this stuff forever. And that's what I'm saying. Like sometimes you just got to connect with the purest and simplest form. And to me, I read a book years ago called Acres of Diamonds, which changed my life. It was really the first of the personal growth books ever written. The gentleman, he did 6,250 seminars, and on this book in the late 1800s. Okay, Russell Conwell. He was the first of the motivational speakers, and he used the proceeds of that to build Temple University in Philadelphia. And he was the first megachurch pastor in America. He was an amazing human being. And this little book, it's this tiny little book I recommend it to you, called Acres of Diamonds, was the first of the real personal growth and development books written in the late 1870s. Beautiful little book. And it's so true because everything we need is right underneath our feet. And as I look at this, you're a scientist, you're a brilliant guy, you write very technical content in very understandable ways, which is what I appreciate, I'm from Dublin, we don't, there is no Irish space program, James. But I think your gift is taking that abstract concept and making it very concrete. I will just say one of the things that is regenerative for me is getting back to the heart of it. The heart of that stuff, I identify with those ladies because that in the heart of it, when you boil it all away and take all the stuff away, that's kind of how I am. And so, I think this whole dynamic of finding that motivation, finding those pictures and images that remind you of the best versions of yourself. That's one of the dynamics for me in regards to optimization. I would like to ask you this. You have this new book. You've poured your heart and soul into it. People who really write a book. And just so you know, I've interviewed tons of people who don't even know what's in their book. And my team, we've done research and we're asking them questions and they're like, tell me what that is again. And I'm like, well, we read it. You know what I mean? It's obvious you've poured your heart and soul into it. This is kind of your life's work. What would you hope people would get? They're gonna get a copy of Regenerative Performance. They like the sound of this. What would you hope they get from they're finishing the book, what would you hope they get, and what would you hope that they do after reading this book?
So I hope that people get a sense of freedom. So freedom from that triangular pattern that you described right at the beginning of our conversation. So freedom from oscillating between feeling like you're over-optimizing and burning out, or just checking out and giving up because it's all too much. And freedom to find a way of living, of working that works for them, that they've got confidence, has got a good evidence base, which means it's more likely to work, so that they can be their best selves and make the impact in the world that they hope. And in terms of what they do to achieve that, being closer to their best selves and realizing more of their potential, which is really what I'm all about, it would be that they just take some of these ideas and try them. And I often encourage people to approach it like an experiment. And so through the book, you'll find there's lots of little ideas that you could apply. And I'd encourage people to just take one or two and try and put them into practice for 6 weeks. Share what you're doing with someone, see how you get on, and try and avoid that trap of over-optimization, quiet quitting, and find your third way.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, it's a great book, and it's very well written, and very well researched, but then also it's brought to the heart of the matter, and that's what I really like. It's very obvious that this was not concocted in a university. The research may have been done there, but it was concocted by helping real life people. No, it's great stuff. It's fantastic. James, we do just a series of rapid fire questions that helps people kind of understand who you are a little better and give you a little bit of flavor if you're good for it. I ask everybody the same questions, and I'm sure other people have done things in different shows you've been on, but I like to just fly through this as we finish your time if you have a few more minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go for it.
All right. What's the single best piece of advice you've ever been given?
We've actually already said it. I think it's to focus on the process while keeping the outcome in mind.
Where'd you get that?
So I had a cycling coach, one of my first cycling coaches, and he didn't say that phrase, but the phrase that he always shared with me, a guy called Jeff, was to just do the work. Just keep doing the work, just keep showing up. And he knew I wanted to win races, and he encouraged me to go into races with the mentality that I could win. But he knew that the thing that was going to help me achieve that was just showing up and doing the work.
And that's why the process goals are 15 times more effective than the outcome goals, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
and it's true in all aspects of life, I think.
For sure. What one talent or gift do you wish you possessed that you currently don't?
If I'm going to be really honest, I think I could probably be a bit kinder to myself. I know that sounds very self-serving.
No, how great is that?
That's probably the thing that if I'm really just vulnerable with you and honest, I overuse that strength of perseverance sometimes, and still I find it quite hard to be the friend to myself that I aspire to be to others. Yeah,
well, that was probably Lance Armstrong probably needed to use that more than he did the other high performance stuff, because he was already a brilliant athlete. I have a house in Hawaii. It's one of the places I go to restore. So I go hard, and then I head out to my house in Hawaii with my bride, and we recover there. And he's done a lot of amateur races out there now. And he does triathlons and things like that. And he's had a hard run of it, obviously. I mean, he was a hard man to like, but it's that kindness, I think, might be as good as anything you might inject in yourself. You know what I mean? It's like it's great. That's good. What book has been most instrumental in your life?
So I'm a believer. So for me, it really is the Bible.
That's great.
And it's
what character in the Bible do you most identify with?
So it's probably Daniel, actually. Yeah, and because I grew up in a Christian home, so the whole other story about how I did and then fell away from my faith and came back to it, etc. That's
the second podcast we'll do.
Yeah, exactly. I grew up hearing these Bible stories, these characters, and regardless of whether you are a Christian or not, I follow Jesus. That's how that's what my life is about, really. Yeah. But that book is full of wisdom, and whether you believe that you believe what I believe in a supernatural God and in Jesus or not, that I'd encourage people to give it a go, because there's a lot of wisdom and insight in that book that's grounded in thousands of years of people's experience.
Well, it's ironic you say it, because my wife and I started the year off in January, and we did for 21 days what's called the Daniel fast. And it's a protocol for eating. You don't eat meats, or it's basically like a vegetable type diet. And we did it for 21 days. We prayed and fasted every day. And at the end of that 21 days, we both ended up with a clarity we had not experienced in a very long time. And it's led to a transformation over the period of the next 8 months or so that's transformed our business, transformed our lives, and helped us rededicate ourselves to the action mission God called us to in the first place. So I'm a big fan of Daniel right now myself.
That's great. That's good to hear.
That's great. If you're scrolling through the TV, there's one movie that's on, and every time it's on, whatever reason, you stop, you watch all of it, you watch part of it. What's the one movie you watch over and over again?
I actually can't pick one single one, but it's the James Bond series of movies. Because I grew up watching those when I was a kid, and it's got to be something with Sean Connery, the original. Yes. And my kids have got into it as well, and now they're a bit older, and they're just like, there's some really good stuff. There's obviously some bad stuff in hindsight, but they're classics.
The greatest.
The adventure, travel.
I found it fascinating. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was written about Ian Fleming and the characters. All the characters he built it on. But in my home, Sean Connery, Red October. Be careful what you shoot at, Ryan. Not everything in here responds well to bullets. That's always been my go-to. Gotta love James Bond. Even when an Irishman played it, by the way. How about Pierce Brosnan? Last but not least, Dr. James Hewitt. What's a good life mean to you?
A good life for me means the time, the energy, the health to be able to invest in and spend time with the people that we love the most. And I think if I'm able to look forward to more of that, then that is the good life for me.
That is a great way to finish our time together. I want to thank you for being on our program, James. It's been brilliant. The book is Regenerative Performance. And what I love about this man is he's writing about something he knows. He has lived it. He has studied it. He's made this his life's work. And he has a desire to bless other people by bringing this science and this insight to people, framed in a little bit of kindness and empathy, along with some very, very powerful insights. So I commend it to all of you. Congrats on the great work, and thank you for being here today. And you can stay around, because we finish our podcast here. For 9 years, we had a recording of my mother, who would give an Irish blessing. And my mom passed away a few months ago at the age of 94, but I don't do as good a version of it as her, but we in her honor, I finish off our little show with this Irish blessing. And I'll say it to you, James, because I wish it for you and your family and for everyone who tuned in today. May the roads rise up to meet you, and may the wind always be at your back. May the rain fall soft upon your fields and the sunshine warm upon your face. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. We'll see you next time.